History is written by the victors, but it is romanticized by the fools. When the singers and maesters of Westeros recount the fall of the Targaryen dynasty, they frame it as a tragic epic. They tell the tale of a beautiful northern girl stolen away by a melancholy prince and the furious stormlord who tore down a 300-year-old empire out of pure, unrequited love. We must immediately discard this romanticized fiction. Robert's rebellion was not a war fought for love. Love does not field armies, and it does not burn cities to the ground. What happened in Westeros was a textbook case of terminal institutional rot. It was the violent, inevitable immune response of a geopolitical system reacting to a dynasty that had fundamentally lost its mandate to rule. Today, we are not going to sing songs of the Trident or the Tower of Joy. We are going to conduct a clinical autopsy of a systemic collapse. We will examine how a king's clinical paranoia, a prince's narcissistic delusion, and a profound breach of the feudal social contract engineered the apocalypse of the Dragon Kings. To understand the collapse, we must observe the catalyst, the tourney at Harrenhal in the year of the false spring. Pop culture views this event as a grand, colorful celebration that went tragically wrong. Clinically, Harrenhal was a powder keg of unresolved political tension, masked as a festival. At the center of this tension was Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Rhaegar is widely remembered as a perfect, noble prince. Psychologically, he was a deeply dangerous individual, paralyzed by an obsession with ancient prophecies. When Rhaegar rode past his own wife, Elia Martell, to place the crown of winter roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark, the audience gasped at the scandal. But a geopolitical analyst would gasp at the sheer, suicidal incompetence of the act. By crowning Lyanna, Rhaegar did not just insult his wife. In a single, profoundly narcissistic gesture, he publicly humiliated the ruling House of Dorne, deeply offended the ruling House of the North, and violently provoked the ruling House of the Stormlands, to whom Lyanna was betrothed. He alienated 3 of the 7 kingdoms in a matter of seconds, all in service to his own private messianic delusions. When Rhaegar later disappeared with Lyanna, whether it was an elopement or an abduction is structurally irrelevant. A prince does not possess the luxury of private romance. His actions triggered a diplomatic crisis that required immediate, rational de-escalation by the central authority. Unfortunately, the central authority was King Aerys II. Aerys was not merely eccentric, he was suffering from end-stage clinical paranoia. When Brandon Stark rode to the Red Keep demanding justice, Aerys did not act as a king. He acted as a cornered, terrified animal. He arrested Brandon, summoned his father Lord Rickard, and executed them both in a display of sadistic theatricality. Rickard was burned alive in his armor while Brandon strangled himself trying to save him. This was the point of no return. Aerys did not just murder 2 high lords, he annihilated the fundamental social contract of feudalism. If the crown no longer provides justice and instead guarantees arbitrary, horrific execution, the system has no reason to obey the crown. When Aerys sent a raven to the Vale demanding the heads of Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon, Lord Jon Arryn realized the mathematical truth. Obedience meant death. Rebellion was no longer a political choice. It was a biological imperative for survival. Once the banners were called, the conflict transformed from a political crisis into an exercise in brutal logistical attrition. The alliance forged between the North, the Vale, the Stormlands, and the Riverlands was held together not by love, but by the cold, calculated mortar of political marriages, Ned to Catelyn, Jon to Lysa. The turning point of the war did not happen in an open field, but in the suffocating streets of a town called Stony Sept, the Battle of the Bells. When the king's hand, Jon Connington, trapped Robert Baratheon inside the town, Connington fought with traditional, honorable military doctrine. He searched house by house, refusing to burn the town down to smoke out his prey. Connington lost because he failed to understand the sociological shift that had occurred. The small folk actively hid Robert. They chose the charismatic rebel over the established order. When the combined rebel forces arrived and the bells began to ring, it was the auditory death knell of Targaryen hegemony. The populace had rejected the dragon. This culminated at the Trident. The clash between Robert and Rhaegar in the crossing of the river is mythologized as a battle between good and evil. Clinically, It was the collision of brutal physical reality against poetic delusion. Rhaegar believed he was the central character of a cosmic prophecy. Robert was a massive, traumatized man wielding a heavy iron warhammer, driven by raw, unadulterated fury. Prophecy does not stop iron. When Robert's hammer crushed Rhaegar's chest, scattering the rubies of his armor into the water, it was the ultimate triumph of brutalism over romance. The Targaryen dynasty died in that water, long before the capital was taken. The final collapse of King's Landing was not a military conquest. It was a masterpiece of political opportunism orchestrated by Tywin Lannister. Lord Tywin had sat out the entire war, calculating the exact trajectory of the conflict. He did not march his army to the capital to defend his king, nor did he march to help Robert. He marched to secure his own position in the New World Order. When Grand Maester Pycelle convinced the delusional King Aerys to open the gates to Tywin's forces, the illusion of Lannister loyalty evaporated instantly. The sack of King's Landing was a calculated, mechanical atrocity. Tywin ordered the brutal murder of Elia Martell and Rhaegar's infant children not out of malice, but as a cold, geopolitical transaction. He presented their mangled bodies to Robert to prove that House Lannister had irreversibly severed ties with the dragons. It was the ultimate, horrific down payment on a new regime. Simultaneously, inside the throne room, the ultimate psychological paradox of the war occurred. Aerys, realizing the end had come, ordered his pyromancers to detonate caches of wildfire hidden beneath the city. "Let it be king of charred bones and cooked meat," he raved. Sir Jaime Lannister, a sworn brother of the Kingsguard, was forced to make an impossible choice. He drove his sword through the back of the king he had sworn to protect. History branded him the Kingslayer, painting him as a treacherous oathbreaker. But psychologically, Jaime Lannister committed the single most heroic act of the entire war. He sacrificed his own honor, his identity, and his historical legacy to save 500,000 innocent lives. He sat on the Iron Throne, his golden armor stained with the blood of the institution he had just terminated, waiting to see who would claim the ashes. The rebellion officially ended in the Red Keep, but its psychological trauma concluded far away in the Red Mountains of Dorne, at the Tower of Joy. When Ned Stark arrived with 6 companions to find his sister, he was met by 3 members of the Kingsguard, including the legendary Sir Arthur Dayne. They were guarding a tower holding a dying woman, while their prince lay dead in a river and their king had his throat cut. Their refusal to yield, their insistence on fighting to the death for a regime that had already ceased to exist, is the ultimate tragedy of institutional indoctrination. When the blood dried, only Ned and Howland Reed survived. Ned entered the tower to find his sister dying in a bed of blood. He made her a promise that would force a man of absolute honor to live a lie for the rest of his life. He tore down the tower, buried the dead, and carried his sister's bones back to the freezing crypts of the north. Robert Baratheon won his war. He ascended the steps of the Iron Throne and placed the crown upon his head. But the victory was entirely hollow. He destroyed the Targaryens, but he could not resurrect Lyanna. He inherited a realm built on the slaughtered bodies of infants, heavily indebted to the Lannisters, and fractured by deep, unhealed wounds. Robert's rebellion did not fix Westeros. It merely transferred the rot from one house to another. It was a war that began with a crown of winter roses and ended with a crown of gold, proving that in the ruthless mechanics of power, replacing the tyrant never cures the disease. It only delays the inevitable hemorrhage. The dragons were gone, but the long, slow bleeding of the realm had only just begun.